And you've just written a book, Cake on Tuesday, unique title. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the title I can explain. The subtitle is 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. But Cake on Tuesday is actually one of the chapters in there, and that came out of the backstory of my life. I spent many years running a stealth startup inside of a big tech corporation, and I wrote this book as a way to capture the lessons learned through that. I don't dive too deep into the tech or the IP, but it's really just, I didn't set out to run this project. I didn't set out to run it long term either. I thought it was going to be a short thing, and then 8 years later, life doesn't always go the way you plan.
Welcome to the show. Nathan Newberry here, your host. I have Elizabeth Bieniek here on the call with us. It's super pumped for you guys to hear her story and her book. That's going to be amazing conversations with us of a high performance. But before we jump in, so many of my students are always struggling with trying to figure out how to grow an audience online or even why to have one. And as you guys are seeing now, more of the marketing shift is more influencer marketing. So many people need that help. I have a free resource down below that I'd love for you guys to check out. It's going to really be a good training on how to grow online. So check that out. I want to give that to you. But Elizabeth, let me jump in with our conversation here with just asking about, what does high performance mean to you? How does that play out as an author, as a coach, as a business owner? You were in corporate world for such a long time. Now you exited that, and now you're an author and a speaker. How does that kind of world of high performance, what does that mean or look like for you?
Hi, Nathan. Great to be here. I love that idea of high performance having a different meaning to everybody, because I think that's absolutely true. For me personally, high performance translates to something where you're giving your all from all facets. I think I like to think of myself as a well-rounded person. I think most of us do. And for me, I know I'm not performing if I feel like I'm only tapping into one part of me. So high performance really translates to, am I using all of my skills to achieve this goal? Am I feeling exhausted after this? And in some ways, is there some part of it that I'm failing a little bit at? Because that means I've actually found my limits there of what I can give right now. And I try to ask the same thing of my team, and when I work with others, same thing. Are you feeling like this is demanding all around in a satisfying way? Like, I've put in the work, this is hard, but I'm getting there. This is using all of me, all of my talents. To me, that's high performance.
Love that. And you've just written a book, Cake on Tuesday, unique title. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the title I can explain. The subtitle is 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. But Cake on Tuesday is actually one of the chapters in there, and that came out of the backstory of my life. I spent many years running a stealth startup inside of a big tech corporation. And I wrote this book as a way to capture the lessons learned through that. I don't dive too deep into the tech or the IP, but it's really just, I didn't set out to run this project. I didn't set out to run it long term either. I thought it was going to be a short thing. And then, 8 years later, life doesn't always go the way you plan. So the book is really about capturing all of those lessons. And Cake on Tuesday was specifically about one section of the project where things were getting tough. Stuff wasn't coming through. We were past that exciting beginning where everybody was jazzed about it. We weren't yet at a wrap up. We were just trying to make incremental improvements to the project we were working on. And it wasn't exciting. It wasn't fun. And I was having a conversation with my ops manager at the time about, how do we inject some of that startup excitement and levity back into this particular phase? Because this is a little rough right now. And she had this idea of, she's just a maker creator, interesting person. And she said, what if I make this Wheel of Fortune style, Wheel of Winning? We're just going to put everybody's name on the project. And at the end of staff meetings, we'll just spin it. If it lands on your name, I'm going to send you a cake that week. We had a global team that was spread across 9 time zones, 4 different countries. And so we were rarely together in person. So it was a great way to kind of just have this, hey, who won a cake this week? And like, oh, awesome, I won. I was like, congratulations, Nathan, you're the winner. And it had nothing to do with anything. It was just a way to inject levity into it. But that's one of the themes through Cake on Tuesday. The book is, how do you find joy in the journey, and how do you make your fun along the way?
To be an author, you're like 1%, if not less, of someone that wrote a book, let alone having a story to tell. Like, bring us back to the very beginning. You're you're very unique in the way you speak, that your background. Like, how did this all like become something of like your core identity of like who you are? Was it something wild as an upbringing? Like, what's wiring you for achievement, to write a book, to be a speaker, to be, running companies and divisions? Like, what does that look
I
like?
used to love to write as a kid. I was a big journaler when I was younger, and I kind of got away from that, to be honest. I went to business school. I started working in publishing, then moved into a tech company, and ended up doing that for a long time. I kind of got away from it, and I missed it to an extent, but it wasn't really. It was always something. "Oh, I'll do that later. Like someday, I want to write a book. Like maybe when I'm retired."
Mm-hmm.
But I spent several years in at Cisco at a large tech company, and in that whole journey, I ended up finding myself. I say finding myself because it wasn't really a planned move. One thing led to another conversation. Careful when you open your mouth, you never know what's going to happen. But I found myself running a stealth startup of very emerging technology inside of this tech corporation, and we were completely in stealth mode for a long time. Everyone on the project had to sign NDAs, couldn't talk about it to anybody, and it it started as a single phase, but then turned into like that phase was successful, and so we did another one, another one, another one, and before I knew it, years had gone by. And finally, when I successfully transitioned it over to the product unit to become a product, and I was able to step away from that startup leadership journey, it was going 100 miles an hour and then stepping off a treadmill, and you're like, whoa, okay, all right. So I took a sabbatical. I took a little
Yeah.
bit of time away and just took a pause, and it was basically started as like a postmortem of myself and the project of, okay, what just happened, like what worked, what didn't, what would I do different, what have I learned through this process. And I started just jotting things down as a way to organize my own thoughts. And the more I kept writing things down, I was like, this is helpful for more than just me. I think this would be really useful for somebody else, because so many things I had to figure out as I went, and I made the mistakes, and I
Mm-hmm.
learned through trial and error. And like, man, if somebody else could have this and use this almost like an entrepreneurial playbook, maybe it could help them in their journey. And that was really
Yeah.
what was the impetus behind writing Cake on Tuesday and why the book came out.
And I talked to a lot of like young, ambitious people. And I remember reading a book from Patrick Bet David, and he has like the 5 Next Steps
Hmm.
book or something like that. And he talked about entrepreneurship, which is a little bit different than entrepreneurship, which I love because there's some amazing companies to go work for, but they're also entrepreneurial. And tagging in like the tech world and that becoming, like we've coined it as entrepreneur, because you can be an entrepreneur as an entrepreneur inside a big company. That's what you essentially were, building this out. And many people were having that innovation. You speak a lot of that in your book, it
Hmm.
sounds like, of like innovation. Now, what's coming up with that? Because I mean, see, you're a creative of sorts, being in a big company like this. How was that? How do you ignite that? I mean, Cake on Tuesday, I love that. That's kind of a fun idea, and I love the hook and fun part about that. But what does that really mean? What does that look like? What's the kind of the book really kind of helping
Yeah, I
level
think
people up?
the idea of innovation is definitely predominant in my career and in the book. And I think to me, innovation is really just asking why, and understanding what are we doing and why, and is there a new or better way of doing that. And for me, I didn't have the most logical career path, I guess you could say. I always joke that I fell into technology. It wasn't, I didn't set out to do that. And I think because of that, I was always the outsider looking in, even when I was inside. And sometimes having a little bit of naivete, and not having a preconceived notion is very helpful, because you end up looking at things with fresh eyes, and you're not encumbered by, well, this is the way we've always done it, because you've never done this before. So you look at it and like,
Yeah.
well, okay, everybody's looking at it this way, but maybe we should look at it that way. And if you do, these pieces fit together. And sometimes that unique approach is really, really helpful. So when I think of innovation, that's largely what I think of is do you look at it from a different angle? I use this example a lot. I don't know if you know the fast food company Chick-fil-A, their logo. It's like a red swirl with dots on the top. It's supposed to be like a chicken head. My son used to always see that sign when we were driving to school every day, and he was trying to describe it at one point. He's like, the sign, the one with the foot on it. And I looked back at it. I'm like, huh, it does kind of look like a foot. It looks like that's the foot and those are the
Yeah.
toes, and like totally get that. And it made me laugh, but it's such a good example of looking at the same thing from a different perspective. I mean, he was like 5 at the time. He doesn't know anything about corporate logos and branding. He's looking at it and like it looks like a foot. And sometimes that's helpful
Yeah.
to have that different, fresh perspective, because that's really what's needed. I think this idea of entrepreneurship, you're starting to see more and more big companies open to that idea, because rather than saying, hey, we're a big company and if we need innovation, we're going to buy it from somewhere, we have to acquire a company or something, they're starting to say like, why can't we look internally? Like, why can't we do this? But there are always certain parameters that you have of a big company. You have to pay the bills. You have to keep the lights on. There's certain things you have to meet metrics every quarter. So if you can try to split that and find the best of both worlds, can you have a little incubation group? Can you have something ring fence? Can you have a little internal startup that you can focus on entrepreneurial ventures? You can kind of get the best of both worlds, and that curiosity and newness and speed of entrepreneurial venture, but the backing and support of a large organization.
Let me ask you about this because, hiring a lot of different people over the years, just being in business for a while, and you've been able to hire, you have extremes in personality types. You have some that are creative and it's hard to like rein down. And then you have some that are just like by the book and you can't even like help them think creatively. Right. And you talk about innovation, and a lot of times like business owners, entrepreneurs, we have a lot of creativity and big vision, and execution is always the hardest to implement. So that's why we need some of those like by the book residual, like ritual type of thing, right? How do you cultivate a team to be able to focus on that directive, as well as looking at like innovation on one side is like it's creative and its ideas and its vision, but you also have to like execute, get stuff done. Like how do you pair or like the innovation and really prioritizing all the tasks and projects that need to be go forward? Like how do you juggle
You
that?
do need all those skill sets. And so I've always looked at every team that I've run as, if this were my own little mini company and I were the CEO and this were my team, is this the right group of skill sets that I need? And I think because of having that perspective, it ended up being much more unique, diverse, mixed teams. So even this project that
Hmm.
the Cake on Tuesday is based on, it was a engineering venture inside of an engineering organization. It was not part of a venture group or anything like that. But we still staffed it with, I had a BD person and a UX person and an ops person and a comms person. And it was much more of a well-rounded thing. It wasn't just engineers, because we're trying to build a business. You're trying to build something. I need people who can look at the foot from different angles
Mm-hmm.
and not see the
Yeah.
same thing. So I think that's really, really important. And I talk a lot about people in my book, because people are incredibly important. Without people, there is no industry in anything. It's the one universal that you'll see across is relationship building, establishing trust, how people work together. And for me, having teams, I like to find that balance between you do you, boo. Like, you've got your thing, your skill set, you're great at whatever that thing is. Awesome. Do that. Let me empower you to do
Mm-hmm.
that. And my ops manager at the time, the one I mentioned who helped, and eventually influenced the title of Cake on Tuesday with that whole process, she was great at helping streamline things across our org. So I tried to say to my engineers, like, all right, you're an expert in background segmentation. You're an expert in video coding. Great. Do that. Now, you're part of a big corporation, you're part of a big company. You have to go to these classes, you have to submit these expenses, you have to order this stuff. Any of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff that I can take off your plate and centralize, Ashley's going to do that for you, because she's looking at that for everything for our team. So we're going to minimize the number of meetings you have. We're going to minimize the number of things. Like, can we streamline that all just for our group? And by doing that, we're really able to allow people to spend much more of their percentage of their time in their lane. doing what they love and what they're good at. And that's a great way to get a lot more out of performance out of a team. So part of it is that the whole idea of you do you boo, but the other piece of it too, I think, is looking at everybody as a work in progress. So
Mm,
I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday. Of if people on your team are not failing now and then you're not maximizing your workforce, because you have to
mm,
find, you have that, what is that upper threshold, what is that limit, or what is that max capacity. And it might not be in their core competency. You might have somebody who's like, great, you're my video codecs expert, you're going to spend 80% of your job on video codecs, but like, you know what, you have a really good eye for design. Why don't you consult on this? We're doing a design review over here with the UX team. Just come in and let us know your thoughts on it. Like finding those hidden talents of where people are unique and gifted, which they might not have gone to school for it. They might not have a degree in it. They might not even know that they're good at it. Sometimes you have to observe that and
mm,
pull that out, because all of us suffer from the things, what we do well, we just assume, well, it's easy. It's easy for you because you're gifted. It doesn't mean it's easy for everybody.
yeah,
So sometimes it helps a, a manager or a teammate or a coworker or a friend to see that in you and say, you know, you're really good at this. Have you ever thought about that? And it doesn't have, you don't have to change your career, but maybe there's a way you can give that little bit in the capacity that you currently
yeah.
work. So I think put all that together, you get a really amazing high performing team.
And you've encountered this in so many different ways, and we all do in our business and our life all together. Is we get inevitably roadblocks. We get some major challenges that come up. Talk about some of that, because there's some sections of your book that talk about facing that and dealing with those challenges and how to really kind of organize a team and really kind of move
Yeah.
past that.
I have a whole section of my book called Leading Through the Barren Middle, and it is all about when the going gets rough, what do you do? Because it's going to happen to all of us. I think it started with the Dr. Seuss quote about the bang ups and hang ups are going to happen to you. It, it, it's inevitable. So it doesn't matter how great
Mm-hmm.
your team is, how awesome the project is, how secure your funding is, like something somewhere will go wrong. And leading through the barren middle is all about that. What do I do when that happens? And I talk a lot about persistence, some element of just continuing even when it's not working, even when you feel like you're wading through molasses on a cold day, like just continuing, just pushing through, just persisting. That's definitely a part of it. I do talk a lot about people and culture throughout the book. And in that section about leading through the barren middle, I focus a lot on protecting your team. And I like to always think of that as being an umbrella and a shield. So, from an umbrella perspective, especially inside of a large corporation, the whole concept that certain things run downhill. So, how do you protect your team from stuff raining on them? Can you be an umbrella that's protecting them from that? There's certain noise and doubt and executive demands and whatever the case. They don't need to know. Just protect them from that. And then as a shield, I think of that as more the things coming from every which way. Like we changed the expense policy. We now have a longer time period between when you can submit that and when you can get this. We've got all these little pieces of noise and busyness. Can you protect them from that? And that goes to my earlier point about like centralize any of the minutia that you can to get it off people's plates, because all of us are human. All of us get distracted with
Yeah.
context switching and like, oh great, and I gotta learn this new process and I don't know how to do this, and you get derailed really easily. So how do you help your team avoid some of those derailments, and as much as you can centralize that, take that off their plate, and protect them? That's super helpful. The other concept I talk about in that section is about being careful who you listen to and making sure that everyone needs a good mentor cabinet. You need opinions, you need feedback, you need to make sure you're not just, a wild cowboy out there on your own. But at the same time, realize if you're trying to do something unique, something new, something the world's never seen before, there is no playbook. There is no guru who has done it, who has all the answers. So take everything that you hear with a grain of salt. If it's going to help you on your journey, great. If it's not, throw it out. And you might have to ignore all of the inputs that you're getting, because if your gut is telling you this is the way to go, if nobody listened to that voice, we would never have innovation. We'd never have breakthrough. We'd never have something new. So being careful who you listen to is really that, both pruning and monitoring your feedback loops, but also like listening to your own voice, of that inner voice. If it's telling you this is the way to go, and sometimes you have to pick yourself up and cheer yourself on, and push yourself forward through a phase, but remind yourself that it's a phase. This too shall pass. You will get through it.
There's right now a phenomenon that most of the world have gone through, which is right now we have the workforce with 5 different generations working at the same time, which is all
Mm-hmm.
different, right? The Gen Z has different motives in reality and different than compared to the millennial and
Mm-hmm.
beyond, right? So it's like trying to look at how do you balance that. Maybe you dealt with this when you were in the corporate world, maybe you didn't, but so many people right now are trying to figure out how do I incorporate all of this. Like my grandpa's working, here, and then my son's working here, and then all in between the
Yeah.
span of things. Everybody has different perspectives and background and context of everything, and the way that technology is moving, the way that innovation's moving. Like there's some big shifts in the marketplace, and I think there needs to be people like yourself that's really trying to fit in with trying to understand, empowering, but also like you had the general type of personality like grandpa of like get things done compared to like you need your
Yeah.
time, emotional day off. It's like those days are gone. And so how do you balance, how do you manage such diverse
Yeah, it is a
age gaps?
balancing act for sure. I do think the diversity of age is significant, because there's some people who have lived a lot of life and seen a lot of things, and there's a lot of wisdom that comes with that. I think the more you see, the more you realize things are transferable, and there you might have
Mm-hmm.
no experience in this particular field, but if you've lived a lot of life, you've probably seen something pretty similar somewhere else. And so how do you apply that to this instance? And then you've got the younger generation who is, we all comment on the fact that they're way more tech savvy than any of us were when we were younger. And so if you can harness the best, going back to the whole like you do you boo, like what are you good at? Great, let's do more of that. What are you struggling with? Okay,
Yeah.
can we take some of that off your plate? I do really like, Marcus Buckingham wrote the book Now Discover Your Strengths. It was somewhat revolutionary at the time of like, rather than do all these reviews of, okay, here's what you did good, but let me tell you all the things you did bad, and let's focus on those things and working on those. He's like, why? If you're bad at them, you're probably bad at them for a reason. It's like, focus on your strengths and double down on that, because that's where you can excel. Now you got to mitigate your weaknesses a bit, but it's the same reason you have very visionary out there leaders who are really good at getting people to rally behind them, but they're not good with details. They usually have an
Mm.
awesome COO or chief of staff or somebody who's going to handle the details. You hire for all the skill sets that you don't have. So I think you see that same concept play out in these multi-generational teams of, some people are going to be great at one thing and not so great at the other thing, and that's okay. You just have to put it together as a puzzle in the way of, okay, how can you bring your strengths and we'll mitigate your weaknesses, and how does somebody else bring their strengths? And sometimes you're going to learn from each other, and that weakness might not be a weakness anymore, or sometimes it will just remain. I'm like, all right, if you're terrible at numbers, I'm not going to make you do our finance spreadsheet. Like, that's not your thing. That's okay.
Yeah.
So finding that balance, I think, it's definitely the sweet spot when you can find the relations between all the different generations.
And I think there's an element too, and tell me if it resonates with you, but it's like when you're looking for companies, it's like cultural fit. What does that mean? Well, it could be the age and understanding and clarity and alignment with goals. This is why you see a lot of like younger people in the tech world in San Francisco. It's like a really similar focus and
Yeah.
drive, right? You didn't see too many grandpas forging ahead, doing that at the time, right? So this is where I think there's some alignment there with the cultural thing. If you're out there building the company and you're looking at that, it's like be aware of those diversities, but those older ages can bring a level of wisdom and diversity than others. I mean, when I was a pastor, I remember hearing a conference of where you had like older gentlemen now like pastors like training the younger pastors, And I think businesses have lost that legacy part and just like forge ahead with doing whatever. And I think there is the diverse wisdom that we can gain from a lot of advisors in different ways. And I heard it said that you have coaches, you have advisors, and then you have peers. And so finding those three in your growth is really good. Oh, you had mentioned something that I want to touch on is, as an entrepreneur or business or any person that's doing something of worth, there's a point of life where you feel like, I don't know if this is the right thing or the wrong thing. And I don't know if I'm doing it, but I'm just charging ahead without people knowing if I'm doing it right or wrong. Like talk about some of that, because I think you touch on this. That's going to be helpful for our listeners.
Beginning of my book, I have a chapter about always have a plan, always be willing to change it. And then at the end of my book, my very last chapter is all experiences are useful if you learn from them. And I think that probably those two chapters really sum up my take on this. Is I'm all about planning and preparation. You need to have a plan. You need to have an idea of where you're going. Otherwise, you're just going to drift along. I saw some quote or meme or something at one point. It's basically like, if you don't plan out your life, someone else will. And that kind of stuck with me of, okay, you need a plan, you need a direction, but be mindful that life is life. It never goes the way that we think it's going to be. I mean, how many of us are doing something now that like, yeah, that's what I knew I wanted to do when I was 10. I didn't know this existed when I was 10. Like, it was something, I think I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was 10. I've obviously taken a slightly different path on that. So I think the journey, you need a direction, but really realizing that everything that you go through, you've learned something through it. You've either learned what to do, what not to do, how to do something better, where I'm weak, where I'm strong, what I like, what I don't. Everything is a learning experience. So when you apply that to it, there was a few times early on in my career where I was doing, we've all done jobs we weren't wildly thrilled about. And I had to look at some of them as, okay, what am I going to know at the end of, if I do this for a year or 2 years, I'm like, what will I have learned in that process that I don't know now? I'm like, okay, I can build this skill. I can learn this thing. Great. Now, if I think about it, if I had to go to school for that, I'd have to pay money and learn how to do it. In this case, somebody else is paying me and I'm learning how to do it. And it really just reframes it for you and it gives a totally different perspective. And I think that's always a nice way to look at an experience of, no one ever has an experience that there was absolutely nothing useful that came out of it. Something, even a terrible experience, something came out. You learned something. You are wiser now because you've come out on the other side. So what is that nugget of wisdom and how do you bring that forward into your next phase?
And I think people are so fearful of failing, and it's just okay to. And being resilient and keep on pushing forward is the biggest key for success, with just being consistent with your eye enterprise of the goal that you want to achieve. So I love their conversation so much. Where can people connect and buy your book and connect with you further?
Sure. You can find me on my website, which is elizabethbieniek.com. My book is Cake on Tuesday, 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. You can find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. There's also an audio version right now. So I'm also recently joined. So please follow me because I'm just starting to build up my presence. I'm at Cake on Tuesday at Instagram and on X.
Perfect. Well, I'll link some of those things down below. You guys can grab those. Make sure to go check her out. Again, thanks for tuning in on the episode here. If you want to build an online presence, make sure to grab that free training down below. Would love to just serve you to help you grow an audience online, because it's really important nowadays. So make sure to go grab that. We will see you on the next episode.